Hey, I'm here to tell you about how I found out my husband was pretending to be me throughout my entire marriage to him, sharing my images with men online, and was charged with a 15-month house arrest and a $202 fine, and distribution of my sexually intimate images to a 5.5-year degree.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you're here, but I have to warn you, today's video is not going to be an easy one to watch. The story I'm about to share is one of the most gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, and yet incredibly important stories I've ever come across. This is a story of betrayal, grief, and the kind of pain that's hard to put into words. It's not just a story about someone being hurt physically, but it's about the emotional and psychological scars that can last a lifetime. I want to start by saying this is something that could happen to anyone, and it shines light on a very important issue: domestic violence. We often associate domestic violence with physical abuse, but what this woman went through shows us that emotional and physical abuse can be just as devastating, if not worse. Today, we'll be talking about a woman who trusted her husband, the father of her children, and what happened when she found out that he violated her trust in the most horrific way possible. So I'm going to play the video for you, and I'll give you my 2 cents after the video is played. But before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Hey, I'm here to tell you about how I found out my husband was pretending to be me throughout my entire marriage to him, sharing my images with men online, and was charged with a 15-month house arrest and a $202 fine, and distribution of my sexually intimate images to a 5.5-year degree. So it was 2017, and I was a mom of 2 little ones. My youngest was 6 months at the time, and my dad didn't come home to our Thanksgiving dinner. After all of us at the family dinner had discussed when we last spoke with him, I left that dinner and made the decision to report my dad missing. That began a 10-month investigation with the Winnipeg Missing Persons Police Unit, and I was their number one go-to person for the investigation for my dad. At the time, I was breastfeeding my youngest. My oldest was in preschool, and I was married to this guy. And I was like I said, go-to for those investigators. They would come to me first, and my parents are divorced. I've got 2 siblings, but they don't live in the same state, province that I live in. And I can tell this quickly because the point of this video is to share the outcome. I can tell this part of the story because it's a part of what makes me who I am. But we did find my dad, and he was passed. His death is still undetermined, and I miss him every second. So we had his service, his celebration of life, and it was beautiful. And on the anniversary of my dad going missing, a year after Thanksgiving, right? I wake up in the night and I can't sleep, and I grab my phone as anyone does, and my battery dies. So I grab my husband's phone naturally. And that's when I opened his phone and discovered the last account. I had discovered multiple accounts on our devices, laptops, his phone, my phone, throughout our marriage, where it appeared to be my account, like something I made. It looked like it had my name even, like to glance at the screen, it appeared to be mine. But then to scroll through the messages, I discovered that all of the conversations in this inbox were with men. And not just that, but these men thought that they were talking to me because all the images being shared in this chat were images and videos of me sexually. I closed that phone, I woke my husband up, and I demanded that we go to police that day. Fast forward 3 months, we did an investigation with the Winnipeg Sex Crimes Unit. I passed my polygraph on January 17th, 2019. I prayed with my husband at the time and asked that, God would, I don't know what God would do, but I asked that he would guide us and, help us in that situation. And I guess he did, because my husband at that time failed his polygraph and then subsequently confessed to this crime. Distribution, intimate images without consent from March 9th, 2015 to January 17th, 2019. I'm now a single mom of 2 little boys, and I parent with my abuser. I go 5 days at a time without hearing from my kids. I'm currently staying in a shelter because I can't keep a job. My mind is constantly battling whether I can trust people or not, whether they've seen me intimately without my consent or not. And I'm sharing this here with a reason, simply because I want people to understand the depth of domestic violence and the depth of sharing your intimate images can happen. I'm the proof. And if I can say anything, just keep trying. Keep trying. I don't know how I'm still here. I just know that I'm meant to be here for my boys. I got sober a few years ago, and I just really spend all my time alone now and listening to music, and yeah. But as you can see, I deal with a lot of issues now, and more than anything, my greatest one is just wanting my children with me. So if this speaks to you, if you've been a victim of domestic violence, or you've been a victim of non-consensual distribution of your intimate images, I want you to know that I know what that feels like.
That video was absolutely heartbreaking. Just hearing her story makes you realize the kind of strength it takes to survive something like that. But also, it leaves us asking so many questions. Like, how could her husband do this? And how is she supposed to move on after something like this? These are questions I want to dive into now, because this woman's story is not just about her. It's about so many others out there who might be going through the same thing and don't know where to turn. Now let's talk about what she had on her plate. This wasn't just betrayal by her husband, it was also the grief of losing her father. He was missing for a while, and then when they found him, they couldn't even figure out how he died. I can't even imagine what kind of emotional toll that would take on someone. She had to process the loss of her father, all while caring for a 6-month baby and another child. This woman had no time to grieve. She had no time to deal with what was happening to her father because she was just trying to survive. But then to have her own husband betray her like that, it's beyond cruel. This isn't just infidelity, it's an assault on her very identity. She trusted him, loved him, and had children with him. And yet, he chose to share her most private pictures without her consent. She never saw it coming. And what makes it even worse, the betrayal was not just physical. It was emotional, mental, and digital. It was a violation of her trust, her privacy, and her very sense of self. Now let's talk about the polygraph test. For those of you who do not know, a polygraph is a lie detector test. It measures your physiological responses. For instance, your heart rate, your blood pressure, and your sweating while you answer a series of questions. So when someone is lying, their body tends to react differently than when they are telling the truth. In her case, she passed the test. Her husband, on the other hand, failed. Now, it's important to know that polygraphs aren't always foolproof, but in this case, it helped prove what she knew deep down. Her husband had violated her, and the truth was finally out. But here is where it gets really frustrating. The punishment he received was nowhere near enough. He was put on house arrest for 15 months and fined $202. I don't know about you, but that feels like a slap in the face, especially considering the emotional and physical damage he caused. In many states, the crime of distributing intimate images without consent can carry much harsher penalties, up to years in prison and significantly higher fines. And yet her husband only got 15 months of house arrest and a tiny fine. Does that sound fair to you? Because it sure doesn't to me. Now let's talk about the mental health impact on this woman. She is dealing with paranoia, and it's not just an everyday worry. Paranoia is when you constantly feel like something bad is going to happen, even if there's no real reason for it. For this woman, that means she's afraid that people around her might have seen her intimate photos or they might judge her. This kind of paranoia isn't just an inconvenience, it's debilitating. She can't hold down a job because she's afraid of what others might think. It's a vicious cycle. And this is where we need to show more compassion. She's not lazy or unmotivated. She's struggling. Yet her employers don't seem to understand the depth of what she was going through. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Her abuser is her husband, the father of her kids. How do you reconcile the person you once loved with the man who did this to you? And how do you explain this to your kids? How do you tell them that their father was the one who hurt you in such a deep, permanent way? It's a struggle that a lot of victims of domestic violence face. You want to protect your children, but you also want to protect them from the truth. It's a dilemma that can haunt you for years. Now, I want to make something crystal clear. Domestic violence is not always physical. It can be emotional, psychological, and digital, like what we saw in this story. The scars left behind aren't always visible, but they are still very clear, and the effects can last a lifetime. It's so important to raise awareness about this kind of abuse because so many people suffer in silence, not knowing how to get help. Now, I want to leave you with a quote from the late great Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers. Anything that is human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. We need to start talking about these issues, whether it's domestic violence, mental health, or anything else. We can't keep sweeping them under the rug. The more we talk about it, the more manageable it becomes. So what do you think? Was the punishment her husband received fair? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And remember, we can all show a little more kindness and understanding to those around us. You never know what someone might be going through. From me, till next time, it's goodbye.